The attic ladder creaked under my weight at 2:30 in the morning. Insomnia had become my constant companion these past few months, and tonight it drove me upstairs hunting for a Phillips head screwdriver. The bathroom faucet had been dripping for weeks, and Cambria kept reminding me about it with that particular tone wives use when they think their husbands are incompetent. I pulled the chain on the bare bulb, casting harsh shadows across the cluttered space. Cardboard boxes labeled in Cambria's precise handwriting lined the walls. Christmas decorations, college textbooks, winter clothes. The toolbox sat buried behind her seasonal wardrobe, naturally. As I shifted a heavy wool coat aside, something hard struck my shin. A shoebox had tumbled from the stack, spilling its contents across the dusty floorboards. But these weren't old photographs or letters like you'd expect. A Cartier bracelet caught the light, its diamonds throwing tiny rainbows against the rafters. I knelt down, forensic accountant instincts kicking in automatically. Beside the bracelet lay a Hermès Birkin bag, still wrapped in tissue paper, and a bundle of preserved roses held together with a silk ribbon. The flowers had been treated with silica gel packets. I could hear them crunch under my knees as I examined the collection. My wife earned good money as a law firm partner, but not Cartier and Birkin money. Not hide-expensive gifts in the attic money. The bracelet felt substantial in my palm, probably 18-karat gold based on the weight. I'd appraised enough assets in divorce cases to recognize quality when I saw it. The bag still had its authentication cards tucked inside the dust cover. Even the roses looked expensive, the kind of arrangement that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. I sat back on my heels, studying the evidence spread before me. 23 years of marriage had taught me to read Cambria's patterns. She kept important documents in the study safe, sentimental items in the bedroom dresser, and seasonal clothes up here in labeled boxes. But this collection didn't fit any of those categories. These were gifts, expensive ones, hidden ones. The silica gel packets crackled as I gathered everything back into the shoebox. My hands moved automatically, but my mind was racing through possibilities. Cambria had been working late more often recently, claiming big cases required extra hours. She'd started taking weekend trips to legal conferences I'd never heard of. And she'd been particularly interested in her appearance lately. New haircuts, expensive skincare routines, designer workout clothes. I replaced the box exactly where I'd found it, making sure the winter coats hung in the same positions. The screwdriver could wait until morning. I had bigger problems to think about. Back in our bedroom, I watched Cambria sleep. Her face looked peaceful in the dim light from the hallway, dark hair spread across her pillow like she was posing for a magazine. She'd always been beautiful. That's what first attracted me to her in law school. But somewhere along the way, that beauty had become a weapon she wielded with surgical precision. The next morning, I made coffee and waited for her to come downstairs. She appeared at 7:15 exactly, already dressed in her charcoal suit, checking messages on her phone. "Morning," she said without looking up. "Did you fix that faucet yet?" "I'll get to it today," I replied, studying her face for any sign of guilt or nervousness. Nothing. She scrolled through emails with the same focused intensity she brought to everything else. "Good. I've got back-to-back meetings until 6, then drinks with the Hartwell case team. Don't wait up." She kissed my cheek absently and headed for the garage. I listened to her BMW pull out of the driveway, then went straight back to the attic. In daylight, the hidden collection looked even more damning. I counted 5 pieces of jewelry, 3 designer handbags, and several bouquets worth of preserved flowers. The retail value had to be in the tens of thousands, maybe more. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Timestamp 8:47 a.m. Each item photographed from multiple angles with close-ups of designer labels and authentication marks. My forensic training had taught me that documentation was everything. Without proper evidence, accusations were just speculation. The Cartier bracelet bore a serial number I could trace. The Birkin bag came with a receipt tucked into its interior pocket, purchased 6 months ago for $12,000. The roses each had small cards attached with dates spanning the past year. But the most interesting discovery was a second phone hidden beneath the tissue paper. A burner smartphone with only one contact saved. DC. I powered it on and scrolled through the message history. The conversation made my stomach clench with a mixture of rage and disgust. Explicit photos, romantic planning, and detailed discussions about their next meeting. Dean Callix, managing partner at Cambria's firm and her supposed mentor. My wife was having an affair with her boss, and he was lavishing her with expensive gifts to keep her happy. The Friday night client dinners were dates. The weekend conferences were romantic getaways. The extra attention to her appearance was for him. I photographed every message, every gift, every piece of evidence. Then I carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it. If Cambria thought she was clever enough to hide an affair from a forensic accountant, she was about to learn how wrong she could be. But I wouldn't confront her yet. In my professional experience, the best way to catch someone in a lie was to let them keep lying until they buried themselves completely. I would watch, document, and wait for the perfect moment to spring my trap. The faucet could wait indefinitely. Over the next 3 months, I became a ghost in my own home. Cambria's schedule grew increasingly predictable once I knew what to look for. Friday nights were reserved for Dean, disguised as work obligations. Weekend trips multiplied, always to cities with luxury hotels and romantic restaurants. Her hidden phone buzzed with messages that made her smile in ways I hadn't seen in years. I documented everything with the methodical precision that had made me successful in forensic accounting. Spreadsheets tracking her movements, photographs of each new gift as it appeared in the attic collection, copies of credit card statements that revealed Dean's extravagant spending patterns. The man had terrible operational security for someone running a law firm. His purchases painted a clear picture: jewelry from Tiffany and Cartier, handbags from Hermès and Chanel, flowers from the most expensive florist in town. He even used his business credit card for some transactions, which would make the eventual ethics investigation much more interesting. By December, the hidden collection had grown to include 14 pieces of jewelry, 8 designer bags, and enough preserved flowers to stock a funeral home. The total retail value exceeded $47,000, more than many people earned in a year. I started leaving work early to follow them, parking my Honda across from the gavel where they met for drinks. Dean was exactly what you'd expect from a successful attorney. Silver hair, expensive suits, the kind of confident smile that convinced juries and seduced married women. He touched Cambria's hand across the table, whispered in her ear, made her laugh like a teenager. They thought they were invisible, but everyone in town knew everyone else's business. Barb, the bartender at the gavel, had been serving drinks and collecting gossip for 30 years. She recognized patterns better than any forensic accountant. "Your wife's been coming in here a lot lately," she mentioned when I stopped by for a beer one evening, always with that silver-haired lawyer. "They seem close." I nursed my drink and let her talk. Small towns thrived on speculation, and Barb was the unofficial information clearinghouse for anyone who mattered. She told me about the expensive wine Dean ordered, the way he paid for everything, how they always left together after exactly 2 drinks. "None of my business, of course," she added with the tone of someone who made everything her business. "But if I were married to someone like Cambria, I'd want to know where she was spending her evenings." I thanked her for the information and drove home to our empty house. Cambria was in Boston for another conference, which my research had revealed was actually a romantic weekend at the Four Seasons. Dean's credit card statements showed charges for champagne, room service, and couples spa treatments. That night, I made my decision. The collection had grown large enough, and the evidence was overwhelming. It was time to harvest what they had sown. I waited until Cambria left for her Aspen trip, another fictional work obligation that was actually a ski weekend with Dean. She kissed my cheek goodbye, reminded me to water her plants, and promised to call when she landed. As soon as her plane took off, I went to the attic with empty boxes and packing materials. The hidden collection filled 6 large donation boxes. I labeled each one carefully, creating detailed inventories with photographs and estimated values. The jewelry alone represented more than $20,000 in gifts from her lover. The handbags added another $15,000. Even the preserved flowers had cost hundreds of dollars each. But I wasn't finished yet. I went through Cambria's closet systematically, identifying other expensive items that had appeared mysteriously over the past year. A cashmere coat that cost more than my monthly salary, designer shoes that she'd claimed were on sale but still bore full-price tags, silk scarves and luxury lingerie that she'd never worn around me. Everything went into the boxes. If Dean wanted to shower my wife with expensive gifts, he could explain the tax implications when she donated them all to charity. I spent the weekend researching local charities, looking for the perfect recipient for Cambria's involuntary generosity. Harbor House Women's Shelter caught my attention. They provided services for women escaping domestic violence and always needed funding for their programs. More importantly, they were meticulous about documentation. Every donation received a detailed receipt for tax purposes, and they published annual reports thanking major contributors. They even maintained a social media presence, posting photos of donated items and grateful testimonials from the women they helped. Perfect. On Monday morning, I loaded the boxes into my Honda and drove downtown to Harbor House. The director, Margaret Chen, was a small woman with fierce eyes who had been running the shelter for 15 years. She examined the donation with the practiced eye of someone who had seen everything. "This is incredibly generous," she said, cataloging designer labels and estimating values. "Are you sure you want to donate everything? Some of these pieces are worth thousands of dollars." "I'm certain," I replied, handing her Cambria's business card. "My wife is passionate about supporting women's causes. She insisted on donating everything in her legal name for the tax benefits." Margaret nodded approvingly. "We'll make sure she receives proper documentation for tax purposes. Would she like us to include her donation in our annual report? We always recognize major contributors." "She'd be honored," I said. "Could you also send a thank you letter to our home address? She likes to keep records of her charitable activities." We arranged for the letter to be sent the following Sunday, the day Cambria's mother always visited for brunch. Margaret promised to include photographs of the donated items and a detailed breakdown of their estimated value for tax purposes. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. The trap was set, the evidence was documented, and all I had to do was wait for Cambria to return from her romantic getaway. She came back Sunday morning with a tan and stories about the wonderful conference sessions she'd attended. She showed me photos from her phone, carefully cropped images that excluded Dean but showed off the luxury resort where they'd stayed. "How was your week?" she asked, unpacking designer ski clothes I'd never seen before. "Quiet," I said. "I fixed the faucet, caught up on some reading. Oh, and your mother called. She's coming for brunch this afternoon." Cambria's face tightened slightly. She tolerated her mother's visits but never enjoyed them. Eleanor Torwell was a demanding woman who had strong opinions about everything, especially her daughter's lifestyle choices. "Did she say what she wanted to discuss?" "Just the usual family updates, I think. She mentioned something about wanting to talk about charitable giving, tax season, you know." I watched Cambria's reflection in the bedroom mirror as she processed this information. She had no idea what was coming, but some instinct made her nervous. Good. She should be nervous. The thank you letter was scheduled to arrive in exactly 6 hours. Eleanor Torwell arrived at 11:30 sharp, carrying her usual leather handbag and an expression of maternal disapproval. She had been a federal judge before retirement, and she still carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to having the final word in every conversation. "Marlow," she said, accepting my kiss on her cheek with the warmth of a winter morning. "You look tired. Are you eating properly? I'm fine, Eleanor. Just busy with work. Can I take your coat? She handed me her wool overcoat and surveyed our living room with the critical eye of someone inventorying assets. Eleanor had never approved of our marriage, considering me beneath her daughter's social status. She tolerated me because Cambria had chosen me, but she never let me forget that I was the consolation prize. Cambria appeared from the kitchen wearing her best hostess smile and a dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. Mother, you look wonderful. How was the drive from Albany? Terrible traffic, but I managed. I brought those legal journals you requested. They're in the car. We settled into our usual brunch routine. I made coffee while Cambria arranged pastries from the expensive bakery downtown. Eleanor held court from the dining room table, updating us on family gossip and offering unsolicited advice about our careers, our house, and our apparent failure to produce grandchildren. At exactly 12:15, the mail truck stopped at our mailbox. I excused myself to collect the delivery, my heart pounding with anticipation. Among the usual bills and advertisements was a cream-colored envelope with the Harbor House Women's Shelter logo in the corner. Perfect timing. I returned to the dining room and sorted through the mail casually. Bills, catalogs, something from a women's shelter. I handed the envelope to Cambria. This one's addressed to you. Cambria accepted the letter with mild curiosity. Eleanor watched over her reading glasses as her daughter opened the envelope and unfolded the official letterhead. "What is it, dear?" Eleanor asked. Cambria's face went pale as she read. Her hands trembled slightly, causing the paper to rustle. It's a thank you letter." "For what?" "They're thanking me for a donation." Cambria's voice sounded hollow, confused. "A very large donation." Eleanor's interest sharpened immediately. "How large?" Cambria stared at the letter like it might change if she looked hard enough. $47,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor's coffee cup clinked against her saucer as she set it down with deliberate precision. $47,000? Eleanor's voice carried the tone she'd once used to sentence criminals. "When exactly did you become so generous with charitable causes?" I watched Cambria's face cycle through confusion, panic, and dawning horror. She was a smart woman. It wouldn't take her long to connect the dots. I don't understand. I never made this donation." Eleanor extended her hand imperiously. "Let me see that letter." Cambria passed the document across the table like it was contaminated. Eleanor adjusted her reading glasses and examined the official letterhead with judicial thoroughness. "It says here that you donated designer clothing, jewelry, and accessories to Harbor House Women's Shelter. They've provided a detailed inventory for tax purposes." Eleanor looked up sharply. "Where exactly did you acquire $47,000 worth of designer goods to donate?" "I didn't donate anything. This has to be a mistake." But even as she said it, I could see understanding creeping across Cambria's features. Her eyes darted toward the ceiling, calculating the distance to the attic where her secret collection had been hidden. "Maybe you should call them," I suggested helpfully. "Clear up the confusion." Cambria's phone buzzed with an incoming call before she could respond. She glanced at the screen, and her face went completely white. "Who is it?" Eleanor demanded. It's Leah Callix, Dean's wife." The phone continued buzzing insistently. Eleanor's sharp gaze moved between her daughter and the vibrating device. "Are you going to answer it?" Cambria's hand hovered over the phone like it might bite her. On the fourth ring, she finally accepted the call. "Hello, Leah." Even from across the table, I could hear the fury in Leah Callix's voice. She was shouting something about credit card statements and hotel charges and lying spouses. Cambria held the phone away from her ear, wincing at the volume. Eleanor watched this performance with growing suspicion. "What is Mrs. Callix upset about?" I'm not sure." But Cambria's voice betrayed her. She knew exactly what Leah had discovered because she'd been there when Dean made those charges. The call ended abruptly. Cambria set her phone down like it was radioactive. Well? Eleanor's patience had evaporated completely. She found some irregularities in Dean's credit card statements, hotel charges, restaurant bills. She thinks he might be having an affair. Eleanor's eyes narrowed to laser points. And why would she call you about her husband's infidelity? Cambria opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was trapped between her mother's interrogation and the evidence mounting around her like floodwater. I decided to help her along. Maybe because the charges coincide with those work trips you've been taking, the conferences and client dinners. The color drained completely from Cambria's face. Eleanor's gaze shifted between us like a judge weighing testimony. Cambria, her mother said slowly, I want you to explain to me exactly how you came to possess $47,000 worth of designer goods that you then donated to charity without remembering doing so. I can explain. And I want you to explain why Dean Callix's wife is calling you about hotel charges that apparently correspond to your business travel. Cambria looked like a defendant who had just realized her attorney was incompetent. She glanced at me desperately, perhaps hoping I would provide an alibi or explanation that might save her. Instead, I raised my coffee cup in a mock toast. To charity, I said, and to honesty. Two things this family could apparently use more of. Eleanor's expression could have frozen lava. She folded the thank you letter with crisp precision and placed it on the table between us. I think, she said in the voice that had once silenced entire courtrooms, that we need to have a very long conversation about your recent activities, young lady. Cambria's phone buzzed again. This time the caller ID showed Dean's number. She stared at it like it was a poisonous snake. Answer it, Eleanor commanded. But before Cambria could comply, the buzzing stopped. A moment later, a text message appeared on her screen. Even upside down, I could read Dean's panicked message. Leah knows everything. We need to talk. Now. Eleanor had excellent eyesight for a woman in her 70s. She read the message at the same time I did. Well, she said, standing up from the table with the dignity of someone who had just rendered a verdict. I believe I have my answer. She gathered her purse and coat with deliberate movements while Cambria sat frozen in her chair. Mother, please let me explain. There's nothing to explain, Cambria. You've been having an affair with your business partner, accepting expensive gifts like some kind of escort, and now you're facing the consequences of your choices. Eleanor turned to me with something that might have been respect. Marlow, I owe you an apology. I always thought you weren't good enough for my daughter. It appears I had that backwards. She headed for the door, then paused. Don't bother calling me until you've sorted out this mess. And find yourself a good divorce attorney. You're going to need one. The front door closed behind her, with the finality of a gavel striking wood. Cambria and I sat in silence, the thank you letter lying between us like evidence in a trial. Her phone continued buzzing with messages from Dean, each one more desperate than the last. Finally, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. How long have you known? Long enough, I replied. Long enough to document everything. The law firm of Hartwell, Callix and Associates prided itself on discretion, professionalism, and ethical conduct. Their marketing materials featured photographs of distinguished attorneys in mahogany-paneled offices, accompanied by testimonials about integrity and client service. They represented the kind of establishment respectability that made small-town wealthy families feel secure about their legal affairs. Which made Monday morning's emergency partners meeting particularly uncomfortable for everyone involved. I knew about the meeting because Jude Morrison, my former college roommate and current private investigator, had contacts throughout the legal community. Jude specialized in insurance fraud and background checks, which meant he heard every piece of gossip that circulated among attorneys, accountants, and other professional service providers. Word is that someone filed an ethics complaint against Dean Callix, he told me over coffee at Morrison's Diner. Something about misuse of firm resources and inappropriate relationships with colleagues. I stirred sugar into my coffee with careful neutrality. That sounds serious. Gets better. Apparently, his wife hired a forensic accountant to review their finances. Found about $60,000 in unexplained charges over the past year. Hotels, restaurants, jewelry stores, all during times when Dean claimed to be working late or traveling for business. Jude was a compact man with graying hair and the observational skills of someone who had spent 20 years as a police detective before going private. He noticed everything and forgot nothing, which made him an excellent investigator and a dangerous enemy. The partners are meeting this morning to discuss damage control, he continued. Hartwell's furious because this could affect their reputation with corporate clients. Nobody wants their law firm associated with affair scandals and financial impropriety. My phone buzzed with a text from Cambria. We need to talk. Tonight. I showed the message to Jude, who read it with professional interest. How are you planning to handle this? He asked. Carefully. I've already filed the divorce papers. They'll be served this afternoon. The prenup has an infidelity clause that voids her claim to marital assets. Jude whistled softly. Smart thinking. When did you file? This morning, first thing. I had spent Sunday evening reviewing the prenuptial agreement Cambria had insisted we signed 23 years ago. At the time, she'd claimed it was just a formality to protect her inheritance and professional earnings. Now it was going to protect me instead. The infidelity clause was ironclad. If either party engaged in extramarital affairs, they forfeited all claims to shared property, spousal support, and asset division. Cambria had written it herself, confident that she would never be the one caught cheating. What about the house? Mine. I inherited it from my parents before we married, so it was never marital property. The only thing she's entitled to is her personal belongings and whatever she can carry. Jude grinned with the satisfaction of someone who appreciated poetic justice. And thanks to your charitable donation, she doesn't have much left to carry. We finished our coffee and went our separate ways. I drove to my office at the accounting firm where I'd worked for 15 years, handling forensic investigations and asset recovery cases. My colleagues knew about my expertise in uncovering financial fraud, but they had no idea I'd been applying those skills to my own marriage. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my career helping divorce attorneys prove that cheating spouses were hiding assets, and now I was using those same techniques to expose my own wife's infidelity. At 2 o'clock, my phone rang. Cambria's number appeared on the screen. The divorce papers? Her voice sounded hollow, defeated. You received them? The process server came to my office, in front of everyone. Partners, associates, support staff. They all saw me being served with divorce papers. I could picture the scene. Cambria's carefully constructed professional image crumbling as a court officer handed her legal documents in the middle of her workplace. The gossip would spread through the firm within hours. I'm sorry it happened that way, but I can't control the server's timing. We need to discuss this privately. Can you meet me at home tonight? I don't think that's a good idea. My attorney advised against private meetings until the proceedings are finalized. There was a long pause. Your attorney? Patricia Williams. She specializes in high-asset divorces and professional misconduct cases. Another pause, longer this time. Cambria knew Patricia's reputation. She was the attorney wives hired when they discovered their husbands were hiding money in offshore accounts. She was also the attorney husbands hired when they had ironclad evidence of their wives' infidelity. Marlow, please, we can work this out. It doesn't have to be this way. Actually, it does. You made your choices, Cambria. Now you get to live with the consequences. I hung up and immediately called Patricia to update her on Cambria's contact. She advised me to document every communication and avoid any meetings that weren't supervised by attorneys. At 5:30, Jude called with an update from his legal community sources. Dean Callix resigned this afternoon, he reported, effective immediately. Hartwell released a statement about pursuing new opportunities and maintaining the firm's commitment to ethical excellence, but everyone knows what that means. What about the ethics investigation? Still ongoing, but his resignation probably limits the damage. He can't practice law if they find him guilty of professional misconduct, but the firm can distance itself from his actions. And Cambria? Reassigned to document review in the basement. Technically still employed, but her partnership track is finished. She'll be lucky if they don't terminate her entirely once the scandal spreads. I felt a grim satisfaction at this news. Cambria had worked for 15 years to build her reputation as a rising star in corporate law. She'd sacrificed evenings, weekends, and our marriage to climb the partnership ladder. Now she was back to doing the kind of grunt work typically assigned to first-year associates. That evening, I drove past our house to collect some personal belongings. Cambria's BMW was in the driveway, but I used the garage entrance to avoid a confrontation. I packed clothes, important documents, and a few sentimental items into boxes, then loaded them into my Honda. As I was leaving, I noticed Cambria watching from the kitchen window. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her collapsing world. For a moment, I felt something that might have been sympathy. Then I remembered the hidden phone with its explicit messages, the secret collection of expensive gifts, and the year of lies she'd told with such convincing sincerity. The sympathy evaporated like morning fog. I drove to the extended stay hotel, where I'd rented a room for the next month. It was clean, anonymous, and far enough from our house to avoid unexpected encounters. The front desk clerk handed me my key with professional indifference. Just another middle-aged man going through a divorce. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over. We need to talk. Dean." I screenshotted the message and forwarded it to Patricia with a note about potential harassment. Then I blocked the number and ordered dinner from a Chinese restaurant that delivered to hotels. Tomorrow, I would start looking for a permanent apartment and begin the process of rebuilding my life. But tonight, I allowed myself to enjoy the satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly. Cambria and Dean had thought they were so clever, conducting their affair right under everyone's noses. They'd underestimated the power of careful observation, meticulous documentation, and strategic patience. In my experience, the most devastating revenge was always the kind that let people destroy themselves. The gavel had been serving lawyers, judges, and courthouse staff for 40 years. Located 3 blocks from the county courthouse, it attracted the kind of clientele who appreciated aged whiskey, leather banquettes, and conversations that stayed confidential. The walls were lined with photographs of local legal luminaries, and the bartenders had heard enough privileged information to blackmail half the state, which made it the perfect place for Dean Callix to make his final public appearance as a respectable attorney. I arrived at 6:30 on Thursday evening, taking a corner table with a clear view of the bar. Jude had mentioned that Dean and Cambria were meeting here to discuss damage control, though their options were limited at this point. The ethics investigation was proceeding, the divorce papers had been filed, and the legal community was buzzing with speculation about their affair. Barb was working her usual shift, polishing glasses with the efficiency of someone who had been serving drinks since before most of her customers passed the bar exam. She nodded when she saw me, then raised an eyebrow toward the empty booth where Dean and Cambria usually sat. "Your wife and her friend haven't been in lately," she said when I ordered a beer. "Everything all right at home?" "We're going through some changes," I replied diplomatically. Barb had the grace not to press for details, but I could see the curiosity in her eyes. In a town this size, everyone would know about the divorce within a week. The process server's visit to Cambria's office had already generated enough gossip to fuel conversations for months. At 7:15, Dean and Cambria walked in together. They looked like defendants arriving for sentencing, professionally dressed, but visibly stressed. Dean's usual confident swagger had been replaced by nervous glances around the room. Cambria kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with other patrons. They chose a different table this time, tucked into a corner where they could speak quietly without being overheard. Dean ordered his usual expensive scotch. Cambria asked for wine. Their body language suggested this wasn't a romantic rendezvous anymore. I couldn't hear their conversation from across the room, but I could read the tension in their postures. Dean leaned forward aggressively, gesturing with his hands while Cambria shook her head repeatedly. Whatever he was proposing, she wasn't agreeing to it. After 20 minutes of heated discussion, Dean stood abruptly and headed for the men's room. This was my opportunity. I intercepted him in the narrow hallway that led to the restrooms, positioning myself so he couldn't avoid a conversation. "Dean, how are you handling retirement?" He stopped short, his face cycling through surprise, anger, and calculation. Up close, he looked older than his 52 years. The stress of the past week had carved new lines around his eyes and mouth. "Marlow, I was hoping we could talk." "Really? About what?" Dean glanced around nervously, checking for witnesses. "This situation has gotten out of hand. We're all adults here. Surely we can reach some kind of understanding." "What kind of understanding did you have in mind?" "Cambria made a mistake. We both did. But destroying her career isn't going to fix your marriage." I stepped closer, lowering my voice to a conversational whisper. "My marriage was destroyed the moment she started accepting expensive gifts from her boss. I'm just making sure everyone understands the consequences." Dean's face flushed red. "You vindictive little accountant. Do you have any idea what you've done? Cambria's reputation, my career, the firm's standing in the community are all the direct result of your choices," I interrupted. "You decided to have an affair with a married colleague. You decided to spend $60,000 on gifts and hotel rooms. You decided to use firm resources for personal entertainment." "We never used firm resources. Your business credit card says otherwise. I have copies of every statement." The color drained from Dean's face as he realized the implications. Using company funds for personal expenses wasn't just an ethics violation, it was potential embezzlement. "You can't prove anything." I pulled out my phone and showed him a photograph of a credit card receipt. "Cartier bracelet, $1,200, charged to Hartwell, Callix, and Associates business account. Want to see the others?" Dean stared at the image like it was a court summons. "How did you get that?" "I'm a forensic accountant, Dean. This is what I do for a living. I find hidden assets and trace financial irregularities. Your affair was just another case study." He lunged forward suddenly, grabbing for my phone. I stepped back and let him stumble into the wall, then calmly returned the device to my pocket. "Careful," I said. "Assault charges would complicate your legal situation even further." Dean straightened his tie with shaking hands. "This isn't over. Actually, it is. You're unemployed, under investigation for ethics violations, and facing a divorce that's going to cost you everything. Cambria's career is finished, her reputation is destroyed, and she's about to discover that adultery has financial consequences." I started to walk away, then turned back. "Oh, and Dean, the next time you want to have an affair, don't leave such an obvious paper trail. It's embarrassing for someone in your profession." I returned to my table and watched Dean stumble back to Cambria's booth. Their conversation became more animated, with Dean gesturing angrily while Cambria looked increasingly pale. After 5 minutes, she gathered her purse and walked out without finishing her wine. Dean sat alone for another 10 minutes, drinking scotch and staring at his phone. Finally, he threw a $20 bill on the table and left. Barb appeared at my elbow with a fresh beer. That looked intense. Just catching up with old friends. She nodded sagely. Funny how some friendships don't survive hard times. I finished my drink and drove to Patricia Williams' office for our evening appointment. She had requested an update on any contact with Cambria or Dean, and the encounter at the gavel definitely qualified. Patricia was a sharp-featured woman in her 50s who had built her reputation by winning cases other attorneys considered unwinnable. Her office walls were lined with legal awards and photographs of her with various judges and politicians. She specialized in high-conflict divorces involving professional couples, which meant she understood both the legal complexities and the personal dynamics that drove people to destroy each other. "How are you holding up?" she asked as I settled into the client chair across from her desk. "Better than expected. It helps to know that justice is being served. Justice is a luxury in divorce proceedings. What we're really pursuing is a favorable outcome based on the evidence and applicable law." She reviewed her notes from our previous meeting, then looked up with the focused attention of someone billing $400 an hour. "The infidelity clause in your prenup is ironclad, assuming we can prove adultery occurred. The photographs and financial records you've provided should be sufficient, but we need to be prepared for Cambria's attorney to challenge the evidence." "What kind of challenges?" "They might claim the photos were staged, the financial records were manipulated, or that the gifts were legitimate business expenses rather than personal items. It's unlikely to succeed, but desperate people make desperate arguments." Patricia handed me a thick folder containing legal documents. "These are interrogatories, written questions that Cambria must answer under oath. They cover her relationship with Dean Callix, the source of the donated items, and her knowledge of any ethical violations at the firm." I skimmed through the questions, admiring their surgical precision. Patricia had crafted each one to eliminate wiggle room and force specific admissions. "When will she receive these?" "Tomorrow morning. She has 30 days to respond, but I expect we'll hear from her attorney much sooner than that." "What's your prediction for the outcome?" Patricia smiled with the confidence of someone who had won similar cases dozens of times. "Based on the evidence you've provided, I'd say you have a 95% chance of a complete victory. The prenup is valid, the infidelity is documented, and the financial misconduct creates additional leverage." She leaned back in her chair, studying me with professional curiosity. "Most clients in your situation are emotional wrecks by this point. You seem remarkably calm." "I've had time to process everything. The anger phase is over. Now I'm focused on practical outcomes." "That's a healthy perspective. Revenge fantasies are emotionally satisfying but legally counterproductive." I nodded agreement while thinking about the thank you letter from Harbor House Women's Shelter, currently framed above my hotel room desk. Sometimes the most effective revenge was the kind that looked like charity. The extended stay hotel had become my temporary refuge from the chaos engulfing my former life. Each morning I woke to the sound of traffic on the interstate rather than Cambria's alarm clock. I made coffee in the tiny kitchenette while reading news on my tablet instead of listening to her practice closing arguments in the shower. The routine was different, but it was mine. 3 weeks had passed since the divorce papers were served. Patricia Williams had been providing regular updates on Cambria's increasingly desperate legal maneuvering. Her attorney, a young associate named Bradley Pierce, was clearly outmatched by the evidence we'd assembled. "They're requesting a settlement conference," Patricia informed me during our Friday afternoon call. "Pierce thinks he can negotiate better terms than what the prenup provides." "What are they offering?" 50-50 split of all assets, spousal support for 5 years, and shared custody of the house until it sells." I laughed despite myself. "Shared custody of a house? Are they serious?" "Desperate people make desperate proposals. Pierce is probably billing his client for creative thinking while hoping we'll accept something unreasonable out of sympathy." "What did you tell them?" "That we'll see them in court. The prenup is clear, the evidence is overwhelming, and we have no interest in rewarding adultery with financial compensation." That evening, I drove past our house to assess the situation. Cambria's BMW was in the driveway, but the windows were dark except for a single light in the kitchen. The landscaping looked neglected, and someone had left newspapers scattered on the front steps. The house had the abandoned quality of a property heading toward foreclosure. I parked across the street and called Jude Morrison for an update on the local gossip situation. "Your wife's become persona non grata in the legal community," he reported with characteristic bluntness. "Word is that Hartwell's considering termination for cause, which would eliminate her severance package and health insurance." "What about Dean?" "Moved to Florida last week. Apparently his wife got the house, the cars, and most of their liquid assets. He's living in a rental condo and looking for work with firms that don't do background checks." I felt a satisfaction that was probably unhealthy, but entirely justified. Dean Callix had spent his career building a reputation for integrity and professional excellence. Now he was reduced to sending resumes to personal injury mills and workers' compensation shops. "There's something else," Jude continued. "Eleanor Torwell has been asking questions around town about Cambria's finances. Apparently, she's concerned about some irregularities in her daughter's spending patterns." This was interesting news. Eleanor had been supporting Cambria financially since college, providing a trust fund that supplemented her legal salary and funded her expensive lifestyle. If Eleanor was investigating those arrangements, Cambria's financial situation was about to get much worse. "What kind of irregularities?" "The usual stuff. Unexplained deposits, cash withdrawals that don't match her documented expenses, credit card charges for items she can't account for. Eleanor's no fool. She knows her daughter's been living beyond her means, and she wants to understand where the extra money was coming from." The answer, of course, was that Dean had been subsidizing Cambria's lifestyle through expensive gifts that she'd been hiding in the attic. But Eleanor didn't know about the affair yet, which meant she was probably assuming something even worse, like embezzlement or fraud. "Has Eleanor hired an investigator?" "Better. She hired a forensic accountant from Albany to review all of Cambria's financial records for the past 2 years." I almost dropped my phone. Eleanor was unknowingly duplicating my own investigation, but with the resources and authority of someone who controlled Cambria's trust fund. If she discovered evidence of the affair through financial records, she might cut off Cambria's support entirely. "When will the investigation be complete?" "Next week, according to my sources. Eleanor's planning a family meeting to discuss the findings." I thanked Jude for the information and drove back to my hotel room, mind racing with the implications. Eleanor's investigation would uncover the same financial irregularities I'd found, but she would interpret them differently. Instead of seeing evidence of an affair, she might conclude that Cambria was stealing money or engaging in some other form of financial misconduct. The irony was perfect. I had exposed Cambria's adultery, but her mother was about to discover what she thought was embezzlement. Between the divorce proceedings and Eleanor's investigation, Cambria was facing complete financial and social ruin. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Please call me. We need to talk. Cambria." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Patricia had advised against any direct communication, and I had no interest in providing Cambria with an opportunity to manipulate the situation. Instead, I opened my laptop and reviewed the financial spreadsheets I'd compiled during my investigation. The evidence was overwhelming. $63,000 in gifts from Dean, documented through credit card records and retail receipts. Hotel charges for romantic weekends disguised as business trips. Restaurant bills for expensive dinners that coincided with her claimed work obligations. But the most damning evidence was the pattern of behavior it revealed. Cambria hadn't just had an affair. She'd constructed an elaborate deception that required constant lying, careful scheduling, and the kind of operational planning that suggested this was a long-term strategy rather than a momentary lapse in judgment. She had systematically betrayed our marriage while accepting expensive gifts like payment for services rendered. The comparison to professional escort services was uncomfortably accurate. Tomorrow, I would start looking at apartments. Patricia expected the divorce to be finalized within 60 days, and I wanted to be settled in a permanent residence before then. Something modest but comfortable, with enough space for a home office and a view that didn't remind me of the past 23 years. I pulled out the thank you letter from Harbor House Women's Shelter and read it again. The director had included photographs of women wearing some of Cambria's donated jewelry at a fundraising event. They looked happy, grateful, and completely unaware of the marital drama that had made their good fortune possible. The letter was dated 3 weeks ago, but I'd had it framed and mounted above my desk like a diploma. It represented something more valuable than the jewelry itself, proof that even the most selfish actions could be transformed into something beneficial for others. Cambria had accepted those gifts as tokens of Dean's affection and symbols of her desirability. Now they were providing support for women escaping domestic violence and funding programs that helped rebuild shattered lives. The transformation was poetic in a way that satisfied my accountant's appreciation for balanced equations. I made myself a simple dinner and settled in to watch television, something I hadn't done in months. The hotel's cable package included channels that Cambria had always dismissed as lowbrow entertainment. I found a classic movie from the 1940s, something about a private detective and a femme fatale who destroyed everyone around her. The parallels to my own situation were probably coincidental, but I enjoyed them anyway. Outside my window, traffic moved steadily along the interstate, carrying people toward destinations I couldn't imagine. Some were probably heading home to loving families and comfortable routines. Others might be fleeing from situations like mine, starting over in new cities with whatever they could carry. Tomorrow would bring new developments in the divorce proceedings, fresh gossip from Jude's sources, and another step toward the resolution I'd been working toward for months. But tonight, I was content to sit in my anonymous hotel room, watching old movies and planning a future that belonged entirely to me. The accounting was almost complete. Soon, everyone would have exactly what they deserved. 6 months later, I stood in the living room of my new apartment, hanging the framed thank you letter from Harbor House Women's Shelter above the fireplace mantel. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the glass, creating small rainbows that danced across the cream-colored walls. The apartment was a 2-bedroom unit in a converted Victorian mansion with hardwood floors, crown molding, and the kind of character that developers couldn't replicate in modern construction. The rent was reasonable, the neighborhood was quiet, and most importantly, it held no memories of my previous life. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago. Patricia Williams had delivered exactly the outcome she'd promised: complete victory based on the prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause. Cambria received her personal belongings, her car, and nothing else. The house, the savings accounts, the investment portfolio, everything remained mine. Eleanor Torwell's investigation had provided an unexpected bonus. Her forensic accountant had uncovered evidence of what appeared to be financial misconduct, prompting Eleanor to terminate Cambria's trust fund and demand repayment of previous distributions. The family meeting Jude had mentioned became a formal accounting session that left Cambria financially devastated. Eleanor had called me personally to apologize for her previous treatment and to express her admiration for how I'd handled the situation. "I always thought Cambria was the smart one in your marriage," she'd said with characteristic bluntness. "It appears I was wrong about that." Hartwell and Associates had terminated Cambria for cause after the ethics investigation revealed her relationship with Dean Callix and the misuse of firm resources. She was currently working as a contract attorney for a document review company, earning a fraction of her previous salary and facing potential disbarment proceedings. Dean had landed a position with a personal injury firm in Miami, handling slip-and-fall cases and workers' compensation claims. His divorce had cost him his house, his savings, and his reputation. According to Jude's sources, He was living in a studio apartment and driving a 10-year-old Honda. The poetic justice was almost too perfect to believe. I made coffee in my new kitchen and settled into the leather chair I'd bought to replace the furniture Cambria had chosen for our house. Everything in the apartment was mine, selected according to my preferences, arranged for my comfort, and paid for with money I'd earned through careful planning and strategic patience. My phone buzzed with a text from Jude. "Saw Cambria at Morrison's diner yesterday. She looked rough. Asked about you." I smiled and deleted the message without responding. Cambria had tried to contact me several times over the past months, but I'd maintained complete silence. There was nothing left to discuss, no reconciliation to consider, and no forgiveness to offer. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. At 10 o'clock, I drove to Harbor House Women's Shelter for the dedication ceremony of their new resource center. The facility had been funded partly through donations like Cambria's contribution, and they'd invited major supporters to tour the completed project. Margaret Chen met me at the entrance, wearing a dress that probably cost less than one of Cambria's donated handbags, but looked infinitely more appropriate. "Mr. Trasker, thank you so much for coming. Your wife's donation made a real difference in our ability to complete this project." "I'm sure she'd be pleased to know her contribution was put to good use," I replied diplomatically. Margaret led me through the new facility, pointing out counseling rooms, computer workstations, and a children's play area. The space was bright, welcoming, and designed to help women rebuild their lives after escaping domestic violence. "We've helped 43 women find permanent housing and employment since your wife's donation," Margaret explained. "Several of them are here today, if you'd like to meet them." I spent an hour talking with women who had used the shelter's services. Their stories were heartbreaking but inspiring. Tales of courage, determination, and the kind of strength that came from surviving the worst experiences life could offer. One woman, Maria, was wearing a bracelet I recognized from Cambria's collection. She'd used the shelter's job training program to become a certified nursing assistant and was now supporting herself and her 2 children. "This bracelet reminds me that beautiful things can come from ugly situations," she told me. "Someone's generosity gave me a second chance at life." I nodded and smiled, thinking about the chain of events that had brought Cambria's hidden treasures to this place. Dean's guilt-driven gifts had become symbols of hope for women who needed to believe that their circumstances could improve. The transformation was more complete than I'd ever imagined. After the ceremony, I drove to the Gavel for lunch. Barb was working the day shift, serving sandwiches and coffee to courthouse employees and local business people. She waved when she saw me, then brought a beer to my usual corner table. "How's the new place working out?" she asked. "Better than expected. It's good to have my own space again." "I heard your ex-wife moved to Albany, taking depositions for insurance companies or something like that." I nodded non-committally. Cambria's new job involved traveling to small towns throughout upstate New York, interviewing witnesses and reviewing medical records for insurance defense firms. It was honest work, but it was also isolated, poorly paid, and completely removed from the prestigious corporate practice she'd spent 15 years building. "Some people make their own luck," Barb observed with the wisdom of someone who had watched human nature play out across her bar for decades. "Others just make their own problems." I finished my beer and walked to the courthouse to file some paperwork for a new forensic accounting case. The legal community had been surprisingly supportive during my divorce, and several attorneys had referred clients who needed asset recovery services. My professional reputation had actually been enhanced by the situation. Word had spread that I'd uncovered my own wife's financial deception using the same skills I applied to client cases. The demonstration of my abilities was more effective than any advertising campaign. As I walked past the law offices where Cambria had once worked, I felt no nostalgia for our shared history. The building looked smaller than I remembered, less impressive somehow. The brass nameplate that had once included Callix had been replaced with something more modest. That evening, I cooked dinner in my own kitchen and ate at my own table while reading a mystery novel I'd bought that afternoon. The story involved a clever detective who solved crimes through careful observation and methodical analysis, not unlike the approach I'd used to uncover Cambria's affair. The protagonist was methodical, patient, and ultimately successful in bringing criminals to justice. He didn't rely on violence or dramatic confrontations, just steady investigation and strategic revelation of evidence at precisely the right moments. I found the character relatable. At 9 o'clock, I opened my laptop and reviewed the financial projections Patricia Williams had prepared for my post-divorce situation. Without Cambria's expensive tastes and hidden expenditures, my monthly budget showed a substantial surplus. I could afford the new apartment easily, with enough left over for travel, hobbies, and the kind of discretionary spending I hadn't enjoyed in years. The numbers told a story of liberation, independence, and financial security that I'd almost forgotten was possible. I closed the laptop and walked to the window overlooking the tree-lined street where I now lived. The neighborhood was quiet, populated by young professionals, graduate students, and other people who valued privacy and personal space. My neighbors were polite, but not intrusive, friendly, but not demanding. It was exactly the kind of environment I'd wanted, but never had the courage to pursue while married to someone who required constant social engagement and public validation. Tomorrow, I would start work on a new case involving a business partnership dispute. The client suspected that his partner was embezzling funds and wanted a complete forensic analysis of their company's financial records. It was the kind of investigation I'd built my career on, methodical, detailed, and ultimately satisfying when the truth emerged. But tonight, I was content to stand at my window, looking out at a future that belonged entirely to me. The thank you letter from Harbor House hung on the wall behind me, reflecting in the glass like a diploma or a certificate of achievement. It represented more than just a charitable donation. It was proof that even the most painful betrayals could be transformed into something positive, that careful planning could turn disaster into opportunity, and that the best revenge was sometimes indistinguishable from justice. The accounting was complete. Everyone had received exactly what they deserved. And I had received something I'd never expected, the chance to discover who I was when I wasn't trying to be someone else's husband. The answer, it turned out, was someone I actually liked.